Hello, good morning everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar. My name's Jackie, and today we're going to be taking you through the VAT verification settings in your Sage 50 account software. For those of you that are new to these sessions, we do just go through some housekeeping first of all. So first of all, you will notice that you're placed on mute. So that just means that you can't speak to us directly today. But if you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to submit them via the questions panel. You can access that using the icon that looks like a speech bubble with the question mark in the middle, and that will open up the panel where you can type your questions to the team. There is also a handout for today's session, and you can use the icon that looks like a document with a folded corner there, and that will allow you to download the handout for today's session as well. The handout's not huge because we're going to do a lot of demonstration today and a lot of chat around the data that we've set up for you on today's session. So what we're going to go through is, first of all, we're going to talk about what are verification checks. We're going to look at those verification settings, look at some of the results of those checks, and then I'm also going to touch on something called the VAT audit, which isn't something that is that well used, but that's possibly because people don't know about that feature. So I do just want to go through the VAT audit, and then finally, if we've got any final questions, we'll use those at the end. Now, a really key question that I do want to cover straight away, because we've had a few questions prior to the session, is does this apply to the Republic of Ireland as well as the UK? Now, the verification settings are very, very similar. In fact, there's only some subtle differences. So everything I'm going to go through today will apply whether or not you're in the UK or Ireland. So please do, if you're from Ireland or doing Irish VAT, do hang in there because it's very much the same, apart from a couple of percentages, which I will highlight for you shortly. Okay, so just so you're aware, we really are just homing in today on the VAT verification checks. Okay, so we're not going through a full VAT return, and we're not going to be talking about reconciling figures because we have two separate sessions on those next week. Okay, so we're really just focusing on one particular element of the VAT return. So if you do have questions around those, it's probably a good idea to get onto our help centre and get yourself registered for those sessions there. Do want to add just before we begin as well, we do have Michael and Abby on hand for your questions today. So if you do have questions, don't feel you have to wait till the end. Ask them throughout the session and they'll be on hand to answer any questions while they're still in your mind there. Okay, so what are the verification checks that we're talking about here? So when you calculate your VAT return, so you actually have to be in the VAT return to access these, it will run some verification checks for you, and it just helps you to check your data before you submit it to HMRC or ROS if you're in Ireland. Now you can review the results of these checks, and if amendments are required, and that's the key part, if they're required, you can make them before then submitting to HMRC. Now there is 8 checks, and by default they're all switched on. And I do always recommend to leave them switched on initially until you start to work out which ones work for you and your business and your type of processing. And then once you know which ones are maybe not working for you, you can start to switch those off. So these checks don't always indicate that something is wrong. Okay, they're highlighting something that maybe needs your attention, maybe wants you to double check something, but it's not always an indicator of it's something that's incorrect. So just bear that in mind. An amendment isn't always necessary, as long as you can sort of reconcile in your mind why that particular check is coming back with a result there for you. And another key thing to mention, quite often people switch these checks off because it adds time onto the VAT return, because it's running checks through all of your transactions. And of course, that is going to take time. But I would far sooner take a little bit longer on the VAT return and get those figures right than end up with fines further down the line. So just bear that in mind, that if you do run them, yes, it may add time, but it is designed there to help you be confident with your figures. So the best way for me to do this is to do it live. So I'm going to jump onto a data set that I've been setting up for the session today. And that's us into this data set. Now, again, just to reiterate, this is a UK data set, but differences for Ireland are very subtle, so I will highlight those along the way for you. So as you can see, I'm in my VAT return window. Now I haven't done a VAT return yet on this particular data set. Okay, so this is my first ever VAT return in here. I'm going to run it just for 1 month because that's how I've set the data up today. So I'm going to pop into VAT return, and the first thing you should be doing, even if you're just coming into a VAT return, to run these checks, to have a look and see if there's anything you need to sort of investigate further, is to take a backup of your data. Okay, so I have been in that position when I was on technical support where people have maybe been running the reports and not meaning to reconcile, and unfortunately at the click of a button the damage is done. So I'm just going to very quickly take one onto my desktop there and just show you the best practice there. Now we're running the check on the data as well, so we want to make sure that there's no errors in the data, because if we're running a VAT return, we want to make sure that all of those figures are correct. And if we have errors in the data, which would be indicated here, that can mean that there's damaged files, which can lead to incorrect information. So if you've got any errors in your data, deal with them first. I'm in a good position, I've got no errors, and my backup has been successful. So that's just going to take us back onto the VAT return window. So like I say, I'm just going to run it for August, and this is the area that I want to spend focusing on today, and that's those VAT verification checks. So if I click on settings, this now shows me the list of checks as you saw in the PowerPoint slide just a couple of slides before. And as you can see, by default, they are all switched on, which we're going to leave on for today. Now you can clear them if you wish to. You can clear using the option here and re-highlight them by clicking on select all. But like I say, I'm going to leave those for today. So the checks it's going to run through is, first of all, identifying any duplicate transactions. So any transactions which look identical in the software. Now, in some businesses, that may be something very, very odd that you wouldn't have on a regular basis, but then other businesses might have lots of duplicate transactions. They might work on a subscription basis where all of the posting details are very similar. So this is one where it may work for some businesses, and for others, it might highlight just every single transaction they've posted. But if it's going to highlight duplicates, it'll show you which ones it thinks are duplicates so that you can pay attention to those ones that are maybe incorrect and make any relevant corrections. The next one's missing entries. So this is where we've got invoices or credits not updated. Okay, now this is relating to the invoices and credits module over here. Okay, and we'll come into this in a moment. I will show you what I mean, because it's one that we do get a lot of questions on. And this is where we're using the invoices and credits module, but we haven't clicked update to update them to the ledgers. Now, if that's the case, it means that those invoices aren't impacting our customer records, they're not impacting our nominal records, and they're not impacting our VAT return. Now, again, to give you some examples of where I've seen this happen in the past, it's normally been where maybe a business has been trying out the module. They've tried a couple of invoices and credits and they're not quite sure yet, they're not ready to commit, and they haven't updated them to the ledger. So it could be that you just need to go and find those invoices and delete them off the invoices and credits ledger. If it's a genuine invoice and it hasn't been updated, then we need to investigate why. Is it just that it's been missed out and we need to go and click update? Or is there something popping that invoice on hold for some reason? So that's again what you would need to go and investigate there. Similarly, we've got the identify purchase orders which have been delivered but not invoiced. Okay, so this is only if you're using the purchase order module. So this might be a smaller portion of you. But if you've had a purchase order that you've marked as delivered, you're saying that you've received the goods, but you haven't popped the invoice on yet. Now that could be genuine. It could be that you haven't received the invoice yet from your supplier, in which case you probably need to chase them for it. Or it could be that it hasn't yet been processed. It's sitting in a pile waiting to be processed. So again, it gives you things that you need to start investigating. And then this one normally indicates that something's wrong. Okay, this is where something normally is wrong. And this is where you've got a transaction with a VAT value where the tax code isn't included on the VAT return. So typical tax code we're talking about is T9. Okay, so T9 is your non-VATable tax code, and it could be maybe you've got someone new to the business who has started processing and they've popped an invoice on or a bank receipt or bank payment, and they've actually managed to amend the VAT column and still pop it onto a T9 tax code. So we shouldn't really have a T9 and VAT. So this one will probably need a bit of investigating and changing of either the VAT value or the tax code. Now here we've got our first area where it's slightly different for Ireland. So here we've got check VAT values on transactions for possible errors. So this particular one that we're looking at right now is working on the basis that the standard tax rate at the moment is 20%. So if you enter a transaction and the VAT is more than 21% and less than 18%, it's going to flag that to say, well, it doesn't match 20%. Is there something going on here? Now in Ireland, those rates are slightly different. They are 22 and 24% to reflect the different rate in Ireland. So that's one of your differences. So again, another example of where I've seen this in the past, and it tends to be more on supplier invoices, is where a supplier doesn't really give a full VAT breakdown and they give you one value, but included in that value, you've got some that's actually VATable and some that's maybe zero rated, but they just give you one overall value. And it means that this flags that up because what we should be doing is processing one transaction per tax code. So just bear in mind, when you get a supplier invoice, if it's on different tax rates, they need to be separated out into separate transactions using those different tax codes to avoid your settings or your verification checks flagging those. Now, next is my least favorite one, okay? And I don't like this particular one because it's not really relevant to many businesses, but it is still doing a really good check across your data. The reason I don't like it is because we can only tell it one most common tax code. And I'm yet to meet a business that only uses one tax code. So what this means is you're processing daily. The minute you use any code that isn't the most common tax code, which defined here by default as T1, it will flag that up. So the minute you use a T0, it will flag to say you've used T0. So for me, I would like it to maybe give you two options. So you could say your two most common tax codes. And we'll show you that in just a moment. But again, think about your business type. If your most common tax code isn't T1, then maybe change this particular setting across to something like a T0 that is more relevant to your business. And identify journal transactions where the tax code is selected as non-VATable. Okay, so this is a specific scenario. There are scenarios that we recommend, and again, another example of this is disposal of a fixed asset, where we tell you to process journals using a VATable tax code, for example, T1, and that's to record a sale. Now, I would say 9 times out of 10, your journals will be on a T9 and they will be non-VATable. But if you're doing anything where we've recommended to post a set of journals, then you might get something flagging up here where you've got a journal on a T1. And it will just flag those up to show you. And as you'll see my example in a moment, you'll see why that's coming through there. And the final one, I would say, is probably not as relevant now, okay? This is identifying possible incorrect EC transactions. Now, post-Brexit, we don't use those codes any longer, so it's not looking at those tax codes and those records for the correct VAT formats. So this isn't as relevant. So if you're going to switch any off, this would be the one for me. Okay, so that is the VAT verification settings. As you can see, You can switch certain ones off. And you can also change the rates as well. Okay, so these can be altered. So a really good question there from Margaret, just around those rates for Ireland. So as I mentioned earlier, your rates in here say 22 in this box and 24. So I appreciate you've got different rates of 13% and 9% and 0. We also have those in the UK. We also have a 5% rate as well. It's basically thinking about your main standard rate of 23%. Okay, so you will find if you use any of those 9% rates, etc., it'll flag them, and it doesn't mean you necessarily need to change anything on them. It's just have a check. Okay, I'm happy with those. We've done those correctly. And you can continue with your processing. So it's a really good point. But yeah, we're looking at only the sort of main standard rate on this particular check here. So it will flag up anything using any other tax code. So in the UK, if you're using anything that uses that reduced rate of 5%, again, it will flag them up, and it will just say this, have a check on this. It doesn't necessarily need changing. So I hope that helps. Okay. So we've checked those settings, they're all switched on, and to look at what it's found in my data, we do need to in fact calculate the return. Okay, so I'm going to click on calculate, and that might take a while depending on your data. Bear in mind it's doing those checks, and it's found 16 transactions, which is great, and it's taken me on to step 2. So on step 2 here, we've got the first box, which is those verification results. And as you can see, it's indicated with that yellow triangle to indicate that there's something that needs my attention. So what we can do is we can click on view results. And in here, we can see what it's indicating I need to double check. So I've got quite a few on here, and you might find that you just have the same ones each time, but I've tried to create this so that I can give you as many examples as possible to try and reflect real life. Okay, so for each of these, we have the option to view. And by clicking on view, it opens up the window. So here you can see I've got a potential duplicate, and it might be great for me to just immediately identify it here. But if I can't, because I've got a really big long list, because that's what will probably happen in real life, is I can actually print this list or send it to Excel. And I can go back, do any checks, and then once I'm happy, I can come back into the VAT return and restart that calculation if you've made any amendments. So here I've got 2 transactions, and they appear to be duplicates because they're the same transaction type. They're using the same account reference, the same nominal code, the same date, and the same amount. Now, like I say, if you're using something like a cash sales account and you're doing lots of similar transactions, this could be the majority of your transactions. So you might think this particular check doesn't work for me. So you could potentially switch that one off. But for me, I've realized that these are genuine transactions. They're just 2 transactions that are pretty much the same. I can continue with them. So if I want to continue with them, I can just click on close and essentially ignore the triangle. Now, if they weren't correct, like I say, what I'd need to do is go and delete the transaction that was duplicated or potentially amend it for the correct details, but then I must recalculate the VAT return because that will impact the figures. So next I've got an invoice or credit that hasn't been updated. And again, when I click on view, it's going to give me that invoice number. So invoice number 1 hasn't been updated to the ledgers. Now, immediately you might look at this and think, oh, this is just us when we're testing that module, having a bit of a play around. That's okay, we can ignore it, in which case you can close. But if not, again, if you need to investigate that, you can either take a note of the invoice number or you can send to Excel and create a little to-do list for yourself there. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment, just because we do get a lot of questions around what do you mean by updated. So I am going to show you that in just a moment. Now, this is the one that I said normally indicates something's gone wrong. Okay, so we're going to view this one here. What we have is a bank receipt transaction. It's got a net amount of £100, a tax amount of 20, however it's on a T9. So it can't have tax and be on a T9. It either needs to have the tax and be on a correct tax code, or T9 and have 0 VAT. So really this one would require some investigation to see what's gone wrong there. And that's transaction 26. So again, we could add that to our list, or again, send to Excel to create that to-do list. Okay, so now we've got one transaction with an unexpected VAT value. So remember, we set those limits. In our case, it was 18 and 21% for the UK and 22 and 24% for Ireland. And what this has done is it's looked through all of my invoices. It's looked at their net amounts. It's looked at what it estimates for the tax, which is £20. But unfortunately, this transaction has come through with £10 tax. So it's just asking me to investigate that. And this could be an example where maybe half the invoice value was 0 rated and only half of it was actually standard rated. So it could be that this invoice should be split into 2 separate transactions, both for £50, one on a T1 and one on a T0. But again, that's where you would need to investigate that. Go back and have a look at all your documents to see why have we only got £10 on there? Is there a reason behind that? Does it need processing differently? Okay, this is the one next that I said will always come up. You'll always find something in here. And this is because I've processed a transaction on a tax code that isn't my most common one. So I said my most common one was T1, and I've had a transaction come through for insurance, which is exempt. I've posted it on a T2 and it's flagged this up. Now, T2 is correct. So all I need to do is just check, have I processed that correctly? I'm happy that I have, in which case we can close and we can ignore on here. And the final example I've popped in there is some journals where the tax code is not selected as non-vatable. So like I mentioned earlier, there are certain circumstances. So 9 times out of 10, your journals will be T9 and will not flag up. But what I've had to do this month is I've had to sell an asset. I've had to sell a car, and following all the steps that Sage have provided me using the articles that we'd send out to you, we have suggested posting a set of journals to process that sale and to show the net amount and the tax amount on the VAT return. Because we're doing journals, we've popped those journals onto a T1 tax code. So in this case, this is correct. Okay, but there may be other situations where you find someone's done something like a bank transfer and they've managed to pop on a T1. That would maybe need investigating. But in this case, I'm happy this is correct, so I can close on here and continue. Okay, so that is the verification checks and the verification summary. Like I say, it's asking you just to double check some of these figures so that you can be confident with the figures that you're submitting to HMRC or ROS. Okay, so it's not right or wrong, it's just asking you to double check, and these are things that we deem a little bit odd in your data. Now I just wanted to come out of here because at this point, if I had my Excel documents open that I'd exported, I can close on the return without reconciling and say I want to close the VAT return, and at this point I can start working my way through those documents to do my double checks. Once I've done my amendments and my checks, then I can rerun the VAT return. Okay, so it's important that you understand you need to come back out and recalculate. So just wanted to show you there the invoices and credits option, because this is one, like I say, we do get asked a lot on what do we mean by updated. So when we use the invoice and credit module, we create the invoice here, but at the moment this particular invoice isn't impacting any of the other ledgers. So in order to do that, you need to do the update ledgers option. And when you update the ledgers, at that point, it then reflects on the VAT return. So that would get rid of that particular error. So it's just going to give me a little document to indicate it's updated to ledgers. And then you can see in the posted column, it says yes. So if you've got one that says no, that means it's not reflecting on the VAT return. So you need to work out, do I just ignore it? Which means it might get flagged up again on the next VAT return, or does it in fact need to be updated to the ledgers? Okay, so great that there's some questions coming through there. So if you've got any questions, please do pop them through. In a moment, we're just going to go through a slightly different feature for you. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is a very similar feature for checking your figures that you can run without having to run the VAT return. And some of the checks that it does are very similar to those that are inside the VAT return. And that is the VAT audit. So we're looking at two buttons here. We're looking at this button, VAT audit, and the tax values audit. So this is the settings, and this is the actual running of the audit. Okay, so we're going to go into this one first of all. Sorry, it's just opened on a separate window there. And what it splits it into is sales analysis, purchase analysis, and transaction analysis. So it might be that your particular role is just on the sales analysis side of things, in which case you can run it just on the sales analysis side. And this is really good for maybe people who want a high level view of their data. So maybe managers taking a look at their data. They don't want to look at all of the individual transactions, but they maybe want to flag up ones that maybe need a little bit more attention. So I'm going to go through these and then I'll show you how this works and how easy it is to actually run this. And like I say, you can run this at any time for any date range. So the first one is identifying sales invoices and receipts where the tax code is non-VATable or not in use. Okay, so tax codes that are being used that aren't going to reflect on the VAT return. So I'm going to switch these on as we go along so that we can include them when we run our one in just a moment. And here, very similar to the VAT one, we've got identify sales invoice and receipts where the VAT is less than 19% on this particular one, and the total amount is not equal to 0. And also sales credits where the VAT rate is more than 21% and the tax amount is not equal to 0. So very similar to those in the VAT return. So I'm going to switch those on as well. And also identify sales credits where the net amount equals 0 and the VAT amount is, and you can specify the value here. So by default, it's £50 or €50, but you can specify the amount here. Now again, these probably won't be as useful, but it will allow you to identify any EC sales transactions. So that was typically transactions using things like a T7, a T8 and a T4, where that customer account didn't have a VAT registration number for the relevant country. And the same with this one here, identify any EC sales transactions to non-EU and UK customers. So where we've maybe used the wrong code based on their VAT number. So not as relevant post-Brexit, to be honest. And then on purchase analysis, I'm just switching these all on as we go through. Very similar there. We've got an identify purchase transactions where the VAT is over £150. So I think this is a really good one where you're maybe wanting that high level view of big purchases we're making. And if the VAT is over a certain amount, I want to understand, I want to know what it is we're purchasing. So almost like a sense of control over what purchases are being made there. And again, where the VAT rates are more than 21%, and purchase credits where the VAT is less than 19% there as well, and the VAT amount is over £50. So again, these are amendable to sort of fit in with your business needs. So I'm going to switch these ones on. And any purchase credits where the VAT amount equals 0, but the net amount is over 1,500. So again, checking if it's over that value, should there be VAT applied, and our EC transactions as well. So the final one is transactional analysis. And this is where we're identifying any journal transactions posted to VAT accounts. So this will be similar to the one it does in the VAT return, looking for those journals that are posted using a non-VATable tax code. So it's looking for those that have been posted to your VAT accounts. And again, you can tell it what your VAT liability is, which is normally 2202. It also allows me to identify forward posted taxable transactions for checking the dates, and also journal transactions where the tax code is not non-VATable. So anything posted on a T1, etc., would be flagged up. So I've essentially switched them all on there because I want to show you what this will do. Now again, you can switch on which ones you think are going to be relevant to you, because there might be some in there that really won't work for your business at all. They're not going to achieve anything, but there's probably some in there that are really useful. And I would say more on the purchase side, these ones that are sort of looking at those values, looking for those big purchases, are probably quite valuable, especially when you're watching your spending. So I've switched all of these on. And when I click OK, it immediately launches what is essentially the second button. Okay, so it's asking me the date range now. So I could run this for a whole VAT period. I could run it for a financial year. I could run it for a month if I wanted to. So this is where we've got a little bit more flexibility than the VAT verification settings, because they focus really just on that VAT period. This allows me to run it for as long as I want to. So I'm going to actually leave this wide open and run this across all of my dates. And what this does is it brings up a nice little window there with all of the things that have been flagged by those VAT audit checks. So I'm just going to expand this to make it a full screen, just so you can see that there. So I have the transaction numbers, I've got the types, but the most important one for me is in the comment column. So it's telling me exactly why it's flagged that particular transaction up. So let's just go through a couple of these then. So if I have a look at this particular one, this is a high VAT purchase. So we asked it to identify any transactions where the VAT was over £150. And there we go. We've got the transaction has over £200 there. Then we've got forward posted taxable transaction. So this is where the posted date was 14 days before the transaction date. So that's possibly where I've been doing some backdating of postings. And I'll tell you now it is, because what I did yesterday is I ran the month end for July, and we're in mid-August. So that's where that's being flagged up from. So if anyone's posting transactions in advance or playing catch up, it will flag them up in here. We've got a couple of journals without a non-VATable tax code. So again, this is my disposal of the fixed asset. They've got a T1 on them. So it's just saying it's got a T1, is that correct? And also I've got a sale with a VAT rate of less than 19%. So as you can see there, it's my £100 net invoice, but it's only got £10 VAT. And finally, it's flagging up that same invoice that's on a T9 but has 20% VAT. So it's the same data that we're working with. So it's flagging up very similar items. It's just doing it in a slightly different format. And again, this allows you to then send it to Excel if I want to. So if I click send to Excel, that's all in Excel now. So I can start to work my way through that, can apply searches, filters, etc. Make it a little bit more user-friendly for me, because you're more likely to have a longer list than my little short list that we've got there at the moment. So we'll not save on there. And again, you can go into the settings again at any point. If you want to change your settings, you can do from the settings option there. Okay, so that is your VAT verification settings with a little bit of VAT audit added in there. We're going to head back onto the slides now, and we're just going to go through a quick summary there. So the first thing I do just want to highlight is both the verification checks and the VAT audit are optional checks on your data. There's nothing that says you have to do them in that way. You might have other ways in which you're auditing your own data, and that is completely fine, but they are there and designed to help you. The checks can be switched off if they're not relevant for your data set. So like I say, the good example there was duplicate transactions. So if you've got a subscription-based business, that might not be relevant for you. And any transactions identified, they can be investigated before you commit them to being reconciled. So you're prior to that reconciliation step. These checks don't always indicate that there's something wrong. It's just that you need to understand why that's being flagged up. So things like items using non-VATable tax codes, there could be a very good reason why. So don't worry if you've got something flagging up. If you know it's correct, then that's fine. It's just for you to have the confidence in your own data. And the VAT audit feature that I've just shown you there can be run at any time. You don't need to run a VAT return in order to access that particular feature. Okay, so if you've got any final questions, please do get those across for Michael and Abby there, so we can get those answered for you. Really good question there, and this it does begin with, this might be a silly question. This is absolutely not a silly question. We get asked this a lot, and that's, what is the difference between zero VAT and non-VATable? And it's a really common question, and it's a really easy one to get wrong as well. So non-VATable means it's outside the scope of VAT. So it means that there's no VAT anywhere on that particular transaction. So a non-VATable transaction will not be picked up anywhere on the VAT return. Zero rated means that it is still VAT applicable, but the rate is zero. And that means the net elements will be picked up on the VAT return, even though there's no VAT on them. So that's the difference. So your zero rated will be on the VAT return, non-VATable won't be. And like I say, never ever a silly question. It's a really, really common one, so don't worry about that. Okay, so get your final questions across. We're just going to very quickly talk about next week. So we have lots of webinars on the go again. So next week we're going to be focusing on the VAT return itself on Tuesday. So we'll run that from start to finish, filling in the gaps from today. And on Friday next week, we're going to be looking at the VAT reports and running those reports to reconcile your figures. On top of that, we do have improved bank feeds, which is running constantly through August and September. We have a new bank feeds feature in our new version, which is due for release next week, and we'd love to see you to see that feature in advance. So please do get yourself registered for the bank feeds session, whether you're using bank feeds or not, so that you can see the benefits of that new feature there. In addition, next week we've also got global changes on Tuesday with Abby, and we've also got the dashboards on Wednesday with Michael as well. So we've got another busy week of webinars for you. Okay, so I think that brings us to an end there. Very quiet on the question front, but we will hang on for just a few moments, just in case there's any final questions or any final demonstrations I can do for you. So I will put myself on mute for just a few moments. If you are leaving us, thank you so much for joining us. And again, we really hope to see you again in the near future on one of our other webinars. But for now, I'll put myself on mute and we'll pop back to say goodbye just before we end the session there. Okay, so very quiet there. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Michael and Abby, on the questions there as well. We'll leave it there for today. And like I say, we hope to see you again, hopefully next week. Take care for now, everyone, and have a fantastic weekend.